Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of our podcast. Today, we're discussing a very important topic: how to learn English for beginners, especially for those who feel like they've lost their foundation in the language. Many people are in this situation, so we're here to offer some advice and encouragement. Joining me today are two special guests who will share their own experiences and tips. First, we have Bob, an English teacher with many years of experience. Hi, Bob.
Hi, host. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you, Bob. And next, we have Alice, who is a final year university student. Hi, Alice.
Hello, host. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
Wonderful. Before we dive into the tips and strategies for learning English, let's get to know you both a little better. Bob, as an English teacher, you've seen a lot of students at different levels. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into teaching English?
Sure. I've been teaching English for over 10 years now. I originally started as a high school teacher, but now I teach adults as well. Many of my students are beginners or people who haven't used English in a long time, so I've worked with all kinds of learners. I really enjoy helping people gain confidence in their language skills, especially those who feel like they're starting from scratch.
That's fantastic, Bob. It must be rewarding to see your students progress over time. Alice, you're a student right now. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your English learning journey?
Of course. I'm a final year student, majoring in business. English is a big part of my studies because we use English textbooks and sometimes have international professors. But I wasn't always confident in my English. A few years ago, I felt like I had forgotten everything I learned in school. It was really hard to follow my classes at first, so I had to find ways to improve quickly.
That must have been a challenge, Alice. It's great that you were able to turn things around. Let's start with the basics. Bob, from a teacher's perspective, what's the most important first step for someone who feels like they've lost their English skills?
The first step is not to panic. It's normal to forget things if you don't practice regularly. The good news is that learning a language isn't like starting from zero. Even if you feel like you've forgotten a lot, your brain still remembers more than you think. So, the key is to review the basics, vocabulary, simple grammar structures, and common phrases. It's like refreshing your memory. You don't need to learn everything at once.
That's reassuring advice, Bob. Alice, since you were in that situation a few years ago, how did you get started again with your English studies?
At first, it was really frustrating because I felt like I didn't know anything. But I started small. I downloaded an app that taught basic phrases and vocabulary. Every day, I would learn a few new words and try to use them in sentences. Then, I began watching English videos on YouTube with subtitles, which helped me understand how native speakers talk. The subtitles made it easier to follow along, and I repeated what I heard to practice my pronunciation.
That sounds like a very practical way to get back into learning English. Bob, from your experience teaching beginners, what do you think is the most common challenge that people face when they're learning English again?
I'd say the biggest challenge is confidence. Many people are afraid of making mistakes, and that stops them from practicing. But making mistakes is actually a very important part of learning. You can't improve if you don't try. I always tell my students that it's better to speak and make mistakes than to stay silent. Each mistake is a learning opportunity. So, I encourage beginners to practice as much as possible, even if they feel unsure at first.
That's a really good point. Alice, did you struggle with confidence when you started learning English again?
Yes, absolutely. I was really shy at first, especially when it came to speaking. I was worried that I'd sound silly or people wouldn't understand me. But I realized that I needed to practice, so I started small by speaking to myself. I would describe what I was doing in English, like I am eating breakfast or I am going to class. Then, I found an online language partner who was also learning English, and we practiced together. It was much easier because we were both learners, so there was no pressure to be perfect.
That's a great strategy, starting with simple sentences and building up your confidence. Bob, for beginners who want to improve their speaking skills, what other tips would you give them?
One of the best ways to improve speaking is through repetition. When you're learning a new word or phrase, say it out loud several times. Use it in different sentences. For example, if you learn the word study, you can practice by saying I study English, he studies every day, or we are studying together. The more you use a word, the more natural it will feel. Another tip is to listen to English as much as possible, even if you don't understand everything. Listening helps you get used to the rhythm and sounds of the language.
That's really helpful advice, Bob. Now, let's talk about other skills. Alice, you mentioned watching YouTube videos with subtitles. Did you also read in English to improve your comprehension?
Yes, reading was really important for me. At first, I read children's books because they were short and used simple language. I also read English articles online about topics I was interested in. When I found words I didn't know, I would look them up, but I didn't try to understand every single word. I focused on understanding the main idea of what I was reading.
That's a great approach, focusing on the overall meaning rather than getting stuck on every word. Bob, do you have any specific advice for people who want to improve their reading and writing skills?
For reading, I recommend starting with material that matches your level. If something is too difficult, it can be discouraging. You can find graded readers, which are books written for different language levels. As for writing, I suggest starting with short, simple sentences. Write about your daily life, what you did today, your plans for tomorrow, or your hobbies. The goal is to get comfortable with expressing yourself in English. Don't worry too much about grammar at first, just focus on getting your ideas on paper.
That's great advice for beginners. Now, let's talk about staying motivated. Learning a language is a long process, and it's easy to get discouraged. Alice, how did you stay motivated while improving your English?
I think setting small goals helped me a lot. For example, I would set a goal to learn 10 new words each week or to watch one English video every day. Achieving these small goals made me feel like I was making progress, and it kept me motivated. Also, I found fun ways to learn, like listening to English songs or watching movies. When I enjoyed the process, it didn't feel like hard work.
Fun is definitely an important part of learning. Bob, how do you help your students stay motivated in the classroom?
I try to make the lessons as interactive as possible. Learning English shouldn't be just about memorizing rules, it should be about communication. I encourage my students to talk to each other, ask questions, and share their opinions. When they see that they can use English to connect with others, it becomes much more rewarding. I also remind them that progress takes time, but every little step counts.
That's wonderful advice. Learning a language really is about communication and connection. Before we wrap up, let's talk about some final tips. Alice, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who is just starting to learn English again, what would it be?
My advice would be, don't be afraid to make mistakes. No one speaks perfectly when they're learning a new language. The important thing is to keep practicing and not give up.
Excellent advice. And Bob, what would your final tip be for beginners?
I'd say, find a routine that works for you. Even 10 or 15 minutes of practice every day can make a big difference over time. Be patient with yourself, and remember that learning a language is a journey, not a race.
Thank you both for your fantastic insights and advice. I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot today. Remember, everyone, learning English, or any language, can be a fun and rewarding experience if you take it one step at a time. That's all for today's episode. Thanks again to Bob and Alice for joining us, and thank you all for listening. Good luck on your English learning journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.